Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It is Wednesday, December 4th, 2013. Getting into the middle of the week here. We got Pearl Harbor Day coming up. End of the week. Claire's going to be with us on Friday. Wally Amos will be our guest on Monday. And we are tentatively scheduled to have Michelle Rosen on Tuesday with some breaking news regarding the Tylenol case and the machinations underway to try and keep the revelations of what really happened behind that from coming out any further, because it threatens the profitability of a corporation, and that cannot be allowed. Phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Craig is sitting in our control room, hand hovering over the phone, ready to swoop on down and grab it as soon as it rings. Before we get into the serious news, kind of a high note. I know a lot of people don't watch corporate media very much anymore, but if you still are, every once in a while there's a little gem that comes out that brings a smile to your face and says it was worthwhile tuning in. Yesterday we were talking about how American academic achievement is in decline, and how we're ranked something like 32nd in the entire world now, and that's down something like 10 points just from when HBO did their newsroom episode with that wonderful speech about America's not the greatest nation on earth. And the numbers are a lot worse now. So over at the NBC Nightly News, they're talking about the decline in America's academic achievement, and they actually put up a graphic that showed math ranked 26th, reading 17th, and science 21st, meaning 2-1 with a TH instead of the ST that ought to be there. This is on the NBC Nightly News. Now, I make mistakes. I'm kind of pretty much a one-person operation out here, but this thing at the NBC Nightly News, not only did the graphics person goof, the control room people with the managing the video feed didn't catch it, the video switcher didn't catch it, the editor didn't catch it, the news producer didn't catch it. And so if you're wondering where all these academic underachievers coming out of our schools are finding employment, I guess it's in the American corporate media, because they don't care if you actually know anything as long as you believe in the politically correct dogma of the day. And it is a major embarrassment for them, and yes, they should blush on that one. Now, supposedly this hour, a selected set, not all of them, but a selected set of the 911 calls from the Newtown shooting are going to be released. A judge ordered the release of some of these calls. Not all of them, only 7, which means they have been cherry-picked to support the official story. Even so, Rachel Maddow on her show came out saying that you don't need to hear the 911 calls from the Sandy Hook massacre. You don't need to hear that. We'll just tell you what all happened. So Rachel appears to have gone over to the dark side, and it's a shame because she started out in the independent media and seemed to really be doing the job the right way, but I guess with enough money and stardom. And I'm not saying it wouldn't happen to me either, and I welcome the opportunity to find out. Now, on a more serious note, there are no less than 3 hearings in Congress right now regarding Obamacare, its legality, the website, and this morning, again, more press conferences from the president. He and Jay Carney are on the air every single day saying it's great, it's going to work out, there's just a few small problems. Really, everybody's complaining for nothing. And it's going to be, we're going to do 800,000 enrollees a day, and it's going to be wonderful. And methinks the president doth protest too much. He's working too hard to sell this, that it's working, and it's a good thing. And we understand why. The whole idea was bogus to begin with. Obama comes out and says, I am going to make health insurance for all the signature achievement of my presidency. And then he says, you will buy insurance. Then he comes back and says, problem solved. And it really wasn't. And it isn't working. And apparently, for this most recent press conference, he had the White House staffers in the room, all trained on cue to cheer and applaud wildly every time the president said something, like a bunch of trained seals. The website is working. So he's literally having to bring his own cheerleaders with him to keep this thing going, and it's obvious, and it's a colossal failure. And Obama is facing even more difficulty because one of the hearings that's going on in Congress right now has to do with the fact that Obama took it upon himself, after ramrodding Obamacare through the Congress, arm-twisting the Supreme Court, to rubber stamp it as somehow constitutional, which we all know it isn't. And then Obama, because of the failures of the website and various other portions of the policies, he took a pen and he started changing the law and delaying the implementation. And under the Constitution, the president is not allowed to do that. He can't take a law passed by the Congress and start editing it ex post facto. And so Congress is now upset that the president has blatantly exceeded his authority, which we already knew, and so they're holding hearings on that. Is it an impeachable offense? It might be. Going along with the use of the Internal Revenue Service to target dissidents, it might be. Now, another embarrassment has come out because Democratic Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, who's one of the big boosters of Obamacare and the architect and staunch supporters, has apparently somehow managed to exempt some of his own staff from having to buy insurance through the law's new exchanges. Now, we all know what's going on. This is a cash grab. This is nothing about the health of America. In fact, they even were admitting on Fox News just yesterday afternoon that the health insurance companies that are the beneficiaries of this legislation, and also the authors, are expecting to make $200 billion in increased profits per year from Obamacare. And, of course, the government gets a piece of that action through corporate taxes. And the government is desperate for that new tax revenue to start coming on in because they need to dangle it in front of creditors to secure more loans now that they've waived the debt ceiling. Because they can't go on with the Federal Reserve just creating the money out of thin air to loan to the federal government because it's destroying the credibility and trustworthiness of the dollar all around the world. So they're definitely between the rock and the hard place right there. And supporting my theory that people at the upper reaches of politics are on these prescription antidepressants, the chair of the Democratic National Committee came out and declared and promised all the Democrat candidates will run on Obamacare in 2014, next year. He's basically come out and committed on behalf of all the Democratic candidates in the United States of America that they're going to be running on the success of Obamacare. And I'm sure there's a lot of Democrats right now thinking, I'm going to switch parties on this one. Talk about hoisting on your own petard. I don't know what this guy, this chair was thinking with a statement like this, because there are already a lot of Democrats saying they don't want to be associated with it. They want to run on other issues. They don't want to wave the banner of Obamacare because it's going to be a vote loser. Because even if the website is in fact enrolling 800,000 people a month, and it performs flawlessly between now and next November, by next November in the election, there are still going to be Americans who've not been able to get on and sign up. Because there are 330 million Americans in this country all now obligated under the law to buy health insurance through the exchanges, and the system only is claimed to handle 800,000 per day. It's going to, that's less than a million, and you've got 330 million to get in there. Look at a calendar. It's not going to be over and done with by 2014. This is still going to be a hot-button issue all the way through next year. We're going to take a break for commercials. We will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're wrapping up here on Obamacare, which continues to be a major disaster. They're throwing huge amounts of money trying to get the website at least looking good. And that's a revelation that's come out over the last few days. That ever since its disastrous initial launch, all of the work and effort and money has gone into making it appear to be operating correctly to you, the end user. And we are finding out that the back end, where your information is then sent to the health insurance provider you have selected, is still garbaged. and that roughly 1/3 of all the people who have signed up for Obamacare and think they have health coverage starting January 1 do not, which is going to be a real shock if they have an injury or an illness in January and they go to the hospital and they run up $20,000, $30,000 worth of insurance bills, and the hospital says, you're not in the system. It's an absolute mess, and they're still throwing more and more money at it. I think they could have just... It would have cost this government less to pay for our hospital bills than to try and get this system run through. But, of course, this is not about your health. This government doesn't care about your health. They just care about that wallet in your back pocket or in your purse. If they cared about your health, they'd be doing something about the 400,000 Americans who die in this country every single year from medical mistakes. But we don't talk about that. It's not politically correct. Apparently, and this is a story coming out of Mercola.com, WebMD, which is a very top-rated health website, is reported to have received a $4.8 million U.S. government contract to promote Obamacare. And this was not publicized, had to be dug out. So if you go to websites where they're saying, we're a health website, we're taking care of your health, and you need to go to Obamacare, it raises the question, do they genuinely think this is a good idea, or did they get $4.8 or more million to basically sell this product to you? It's a lot of money. Anyway, I want to move on over to Mayor Boris Johnson over in Great Britain, because apparently he made a comment basically saying that some people are just not intelligent enough to progress in life. He's basically taking this elitist position that, well, it's really the reason you're poor and hungry and homeless and unemployed is you don't have the smarts to take it. So he was being interviewed on the BBC, and BBC host Nick Ferrari hit him on the spot with an IQ test, which Boris Johnson flunked. Now, this is an oldie but a goodie. Nick Ferrari said, a house built with all southern exposure, and there's a bear walks by, what color is the bear? This is an oldie. And the idea is it's supposed to be a polar bear. But then Nick Ferrari goes on, as he explains what the story is, he says the house is in Antarctica, because we now know there's nothing at the North Pole to actually build a house on. So he shifts it to Antarctica and forgets that a house built at the South Pole would have an all-northern exposure. And, by the way, Nick, there aren't any polar bears in Antarctica. So Nick Ferrari also flunked the IQ test on the air. And together with this thing from the NBC Nightly News about the 21st position in the academic scores, boy, our corporate media is very much in decline. We need to wag our finger at them. Over in Japan, they're back to basically taking the position now that any form of public protest is terrorism. They are that afraid of their own people. And you need to remember, the Japanese people have a much stronger tradition of obedience to authority. So it takes a lot to get them riled up. Like food at the supermarket that cooks itself and glows in the dark. And this article came out over at WashingtonsBlog.com asking the question, is Japan sliding back into fascism? And the answer is yes. Because history has shown when these Ponzi scheme private central banks start to fail, the government is driven into fascism to protect itself as the next step on the way to eventual total collapse. And if you'll notice, it's happening right now in all of these countries that are under the control of these private central banks. And now they're all hopelessly in debt. They're struggling and scamming to just make it last a little bit longer. And as the populations of these countries stand up and say, we've had enough, oh, you're a terrorist for protesting. How dare you question the bankers? We've got to lock you up and tear gas you and beanbag you and all the rest of the things they're doing. Not just Japan, it's happening in Spain. And it's happening here in the United States of America. They've really messed up the country. They don't want to admit they're responsible for the problems. They just want to come up with some way that they can shoo you away so they don't have to look at you. Remember, a couple of years ago, we had the free speech zones where you were only allowed to have protests if you carried them out in the assigned area, which was usually well away from whatever public event was going on, well away from where the media was, well away from where the politicians were, so they didn't have to look at you. And now they've come up with the no free speech zone, which is automatically assigned around any of our political leadership. It is now considered a crime for you to protest if you are within eyesight of the President, members of Congress, Supreme Court judges. Now that, of course, is absolutely contrary to the First Amendment, which says not only do you have a right to speak your mind without fear of reprisal, you have a right to peacefully assemble as a population and to petition the government for redress of grievances. And obviously, in order for you to present that petition to the government, you've got to be talking to them. You've got to be looking at them face to face. And that's another sign of just how our nation is, in fact, sliding into fascism. As a last desperate gasp by the money junkies to hang on to power before it all starts falling apart here. Now, we're getting back into, again, we're keeping an eye for the supposed release of the Newtown 911 calls. The mother of one of the victims, Nicole Hockley, has come out there basically saying that all this hue and cry for enhanced background checks on purchasers of guns and ammos would not have prevented Adam Lanza from getting the guns he used, because he got the guns from somebody who'd already gone through the security check and the waiting period, and that's always going to be a problem. Criminals or people driven to insanity on SSRIs, they'll just go steal the guns. We went through that in Los Angeles during the riots that followed the Rodney King trial. When the LAPD were running like heck, law-abiding citizens were going to the gun stores trying to buy guns and ammo, got hit with a 15-day waiting period on the gun, and then the LA City Council actually imposed an ammunition ban across the county. The rioters broke into the gun stores and took all the guns and ammos they needed. Just did not work at all. And they're just still out there trying to push this gun control. And the one thing they will not talk about is what medications Adam Lanza was on. We know that one of them was Fanapt, and the manufacturer of Fanapt admits in its own documentation this medication can drive people to absolute crazy, insane things. And they don't want that to come out because that's a threat to the profitability of the big pharmacy companies. We had a video that we had on our website a while back of one of the Connecticut prosecutors just saying, well, even if Adam Lanza was driven to do this by his medication, the public doesn't need to know that because then they'll stop taking their medications. I guess the guy owns stock in the pharmaceutical companies. Got to take a break for commercials. We will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. I'm looking at an article that just came in. Apparently, there are protests in Japan against the government over this new Secrets Protection Act. And this is all tied in with all of a sudden this idea that protests are terrorism and the rest of it, because the Japanese government has created for itself a huge credibility crisis. This in a nation where the concept of personal honor is the core of their identity. And they have a problem because the people of Japan are now very much aware that the government of Japan and TEPCO have been concealing the problems with Fukushima ever since that disaster happened. They've been misrepresenting what was seen in the photographs. Remember that one that we talked about where reactor 3 blew up? And they said, oh, it was just hydrogen, nothing to worry about. Now, a hydrogen explosion produces water vapor, which is white. And the cloud of debris that was over this reactor building was this pale, sickly, yellow-green, which happens to be the same color as the quadrivalent form of plutonium oxide. So we knew at that point they were not being straight with the world and their own people. And so now more and more people in Japan are starting to dig at what's really going on up there. Are their lives and health very much in danger? The government of Japan wants to reopen the waters off Fukushima for fishing. They want to revive the agriculture in the area around that whole thing. And the people of Japan are very concerned that they're rushing things and that they are in fact putting the profitability of agricultural and seafood corporations ahead of the health of the people. Same problem we're seeing here in the United States up in Alaska, where after Fukushima, the U.S. Department of Agriculture had a meeting with the Alaska State Fisheries chairman and said, we don't need to test for radiation. Really, little radiation's not good. Yeah, little radiation's actually good for you. Remember when Ann Coulter was coming out there trying to sell that one? And so people in Japan are starting to dig at the available facts and make them public. And what this law in Japan is all about is very similar to the laws they're talking about passing in Great Britain, to where anybody in journalism, corporate or independent, who tells a secret that the government does not want to get out because it's embarrassing, is going to be subject to prosecution. That's tyranny, that's dictatorship, that's fascism. And it's spreading all over the world right now, especially in every nation that is enslaved to these private central banks, because the population is beginning to wake up and realize that all that they have suffered goes back to that failed economic experiment of having a privately owned central bank issue all of the public currency as a loan at interest. We fought a revolution to get away from that kind of banking. And we got sold back into that slavery by a corrupted Congress and a corrupted president 100 years ago. And now the American people know about it. So they're, oh, you can't talk about that. Yeah, First Amendment, we got to get rid of that. You can't tell the truth on the government. Yeah, we can. It's our right and it's our duty. Not just here in the United States of America, but anywhere where the government has forgotten that their job is to take care of the whole nation and not just the money junkies. The people have a right and a duty to stand up and say, guys, you really messed up. Because they did. Now, a story coming out of the internationalman.com, Jim Rickards is out there talking about the decline of the petrodollar system and how it will inevitably force a rise in the price of physical gold. Now, we've seen all this machinations about trying to suppress gold prices, and we've seen all these games by the money center banks where they're storing gold for other countries like Germany, but they're actually leasing it out the back door to dump on the market to satisfy all these excessive gold futures contracts, trying to keep the price hammered down so people will keep their money in the banks and in the stock markets. And it's not going to last forever. And as the petrodollar system comes down, and at this point, anybody who's studying global economics understands the dollar is in decline and headed for abandonment as the global currency. Right now, the yuan has gone past the euro. And it's in second place. They're number 2. They're trying harder. More and more countries are moving away from the petrodollar deal faster than the U.S. can invade and reconquer them and bring them back in. And when that starts to come apart, those of you holding physical silver and gold are going to be very pleasantly surprised. Because that metal really is worth a lot more than the corporate media is trying to tell you it is. They're still out there trying to say, oh, you don't need that. Bring it on down. We'll give you ink and paper for it. Down at our local shopping mall at the bottom of the hill, you know, the Christmas rush is on, and the little kiosk where you can sell your old dented, scratched-up gold jewelry, and we'll give you some cash for it, and you can go buy something that's going to fall apart as soon as it's out of warranty. They're just, the gold scavenge is on. We were talking about it with that caller yesterday where pawn shops used to be places filled with all kinds of interesting used stuff, like the Pawn Stars reality TV show. And around here, the pawn shops don't do anything outside of gold. That's what they're there for, to scavenge what's left of the gold held by private citizens in exchange for ink and paper. And when it starts to come apart, those of you who prudently, wisely invested in silver and gold, Republic Trading Group, plug, are going to be better situated to survive the transition of the economy than those who are still dependent on the banks and still have their money in the bank accounts and still believe the dogma coming from the Federal Reserve. And at this point, it's not a question of if. It's a question of when. The dollar is dropped as the global trade and reserve currency, and without that demand to prop up its value, it's going to just plummet because the U.S. doesn't make products anymore. to back up that dollar. People are willing to trade with the yuan because you can take that yuan back to China and you can get quality manufactured goods, agricultural produce. And here in the United States of America, our manufacturing has been allowed to rot away over the last 30 years, and this hideous experiment with genetic modification has literally toxified our entire agricultural industry to the point where other nations are refusing to import our crops. So there is nothing to back up the value of the dollar other than the promises of future slave labor by Americans who cannot meet those demands on their future tax revenues to pay off the bonds, because the infrastructure, the economic infrastructure that allows us to transform our labor into sufficient money to meet those demands has also been allowed to rot away. So we're just watching the clock. It's just a matter of when. When is it going to happen? Anyway, now then, over in Afghanistan, as you know, the United States is arm-twisting Hamid Karzai to try and sign an enhanced security pact that would allow the United States to keep their soldiers in Afghanistan until either the oil or the opium or both run out. Hamid Karzai is resisting and saying he only has another month in office. It is really up to the new incoming government to either make or not make that deal. And obviously the new incoming government is not kindly disposed to the Americans staying inside Afghanistan any longer than they absolutely have to. And so now we've got John Kerry out there saying, well, if Karzai refuses to sign the pact, we can use a lower level official. We'll, anybody in the Afghan government signs it, we'll consider it legally binding. We can get the janitor to sign it, and we'll see it as legally binding. Okay, we're going to take a phone call. Scott in Wisconsin, I'm sorry I let you sit and wait. I lost track of you. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael, how you doing today?
Doing
Aloha.
great. Aloha.
Mike, you were talking about this. I don't like to call it the fearless leader's name. This shredder of health care. I had a situation last week where I called in for insurance on our family. Tell you how dangerous this is. And you're right. You hit it right on the head, Mikey. That this is just another cash grab to crush the American people. And I'll give you an example. I called a provider, and I got a family of 5. She goes, well, everywhere I looked, it was $10,000 on one side, and I asked, what's the question on a family of 5? Well, she goes, well, the lowest that your family of 5 is going to be paying is $350 a month.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, what's the $10,000 for? He goes, that's the case you have to go in and have surgery in that. That just shows you on how ridiculous this shredder is. You're supposed to have the insurance, so when you go in to have surgery, that it's low paying.
Yeah, Scott, we got to take a break for commercials. Do not hang up. I want to come back to this very topic after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we're talking with Scott in Wisconsin, and that is a very harsh reality people signing up for Obamacare are coming to understand. The new Obamacare-compliant insurance policies are much more expensive than what they had before, and the real kicker are the deductibles. Now, for those of you who don't know what that means is, if you have a health insurance policy and you go to a hospital for X, the insurance does not pay 100%. They'll pay a portion of it, and the part that you pay is the deductible. It's usually not all that much under the current policies. Sometimes it's called a copay instead of a deductible. The new policies have deductibles that are so high that most people buying these policies during the course of an average year will never reach that deductible. They'll be paying for their own medical care out of their pocket until they hit that deductible, at which point the insurance benefits kick in, which is there if you have a major medical crisis and you need surgery or major treatment. But for all the minor day-to-day stuff, flu, bellyache, that kind of stuff, you're basically paying for your own medical care. Most Americans buying Obamacare-compliant health insurance policies are paying huge amounts of money for a policy they're probably not actually going to use all that much from year to year to year. And those Americans who are on current health plans, millions have already been notified that their current policies are not Obamacare compliant. They're being canceled, or apparently under the new change in the rules, they'll be canceled a year from now. And you'll be forced to buy these new, more expensive, less beneficial policies, which is why we've got the health insurance companies bragging about the additional $200 billion a year in profits they're going to make off this deal. And the government holding its hand out for their piece of the action with which to try and desperately balance the federal budget. It's a cash grab. Anyway, Scott, please continue where you left off.
Well, you know, Michael, Michael, I love you. And Mike, you're exactly right, because who's got the money to go in and pay a $10,000 deductible up front before if they're going in for major surgery? It's a like you said, it's a destroyer. And Mike, what about the doctors that I read an article a while back? 39% of the doctors that are hooked up with the federal government, they're going to lay off. So you attack the general. Remember, we were talking in the past about the big federal insurance things destroy this. Now it's getting down to destroy the private and put it on the own individual sector to destroy them. And that's what you're talking about. And I'm addressing this. No matter what you look at it, I'm not even signed up with Obamacare. This is just another insurance provider in my state. It's dangerous, and I'm thankful that you have looked through the mirror, Brother Mike, to see this big scam that just totally destroy the rest of the American people. And I told her, you mean to tell me a $10,000 deductible up front if you have to go in for surgery? Oh my gosh, Mike!
Yeah, what's going to happen if you don't have that money?
My call, brother.
You're welcome.
I'll talk to you later. Aloha.
Aloha. I mean, what are these doctors and hospitals going to do if you don't have $10,000 in cash just lying around to cover the deductible? Are they going to refuse to treat you? And it's one more indicator. There is nothing anywhere in Obamacare that actually looks like it's intending to worry about the health of the American people. It's all about forcing you to buy health insurance at higher cost and lower benefit. And Obamacare did not add a single doctor to the American medical system, but they did create jobs for 15,000 new IRS employees to make sure that you're buying your insurance, and if you're not, you're going to pay a fine. It's a cash grab. That's all it is. And it's not working, which is why now, even as we get hit with another record winter across the North American continent, they're already back to saying, oh, we got to have a carbon tax. Global warming is climate change, whatever we're going to call it here. We've got to make you pay more money. And you know where it's going to fail? Because all of these policies, whether it's Obamacare or carbon taxes or fees or now TSA wants to raise the security fees so you have to pay more money to get your crotch groped, they're all coming out of a worldview that there is still ample wealth out here in the hinterland, and all the government and the corporations have to do is come up with a new way to just reach out and grab it to themselves, and they are wrong. We are tapped out. We, the American people, are broke. The money junkies got pretty much all of it. And they're still grabbing, because the way the money junkie bank is set up, you can never pay off the debt. By design, the debt is always greater than the total money supply in circulation. And it doesn't matter how much they grab and how much they take, the debt cannot be satisfied because it's designed to be unpayable to keep us all their slaves. And it works only so long as you go on believing that's the way it's supposed to be. We're going to grab a phone call. Eugene in Ohio. Aloha, Eugene. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello there. Aloha to you, Mike. I've been reading here recently, and I wanted to see if you had any knowledge of this, about these steel containers that's being shipped from the Pacific that people can buy over here for storage space or small livable spaces there. And a few message boards I've been reading on saying there's they have found residual of radiation contamination. So many excessive rads on these meters that people have been suggesting that people start to use now when they buy these steel storage containers. Have you heard anything about that?
Well, yeah, we have heard about it. Ever since the Fukushima disaster, of course, Japan's commerce continues, and the containers for the containerized shipping cargo ships, they sort of float around the world, and they'll be in Japan, then they'll be in Norway, then they'll be in Great Britain. And some of them were loaded with cargo that turned out to be radioactive. We know there was a big stink where some of the Japanese manufactured cars arrived in China and were found to be radioactive. At this point, you almost, if you're dealing with something like that and you have a concern, you need to get yourself a radiation detector. And here's the important part. Not all radiation detectors, and especially the less expensive ones, do not pick up alpha radiation, which is the weakest form. Now, alpha radiation, as long as it's outside you, it's not going to hurt you, because even the dead skin cells, the epithelium on your skin, will block alpha radiation. Alpha radiation is only harmful if you are ingesting it and become contaminated. But the beta and gamma rays, that you need to be paying attention to. And yes, some of these isotopes are going to last a very, very long time. Some don't. Some of the fission products from Fukushima, it's already been long enough where they're pretty much decayed away. But some of the uranium and plutonium isotopes, they're going to be in the environment for a very, very long time. And I know right now Fukushima's talking about just dumping all the radiation in the ocean, but we're going to dilute it. We're going to water it down before we do that, which is nonsense. Because just trying to spread it out throughout the entire ocean doesn't solve the problem. It just spreads it around. What they really ought to do is find one of these uninhabited Pacific islands with a dead volcano on it and put it all in the middle of that dead volcano. But that would cost too much money, as opposed to simply going out to the beach and pitching it into the water. The real danger for all of that is it's not going to dilute, because a fish that becomes contaminated off the coast of Fukushima is still just as contaminated when it's harvested and eaten off the coast of San Diego. And that's already happened with some tuna. So it's a huge mess. They're looking for a way to get out of it that is not going to solve the problem, but is going to convince everybody the problem is solved while costing the least amount of money. Same approach they had during the Deepwater Horizon disaster in the Gulf of Mexico. They didn't want to clean it all up. They just wanted to sink it out of sight so people couldn't see it.
Okay. Now, do you have any one particular Geiger counter or radiation detector in mind that maybe I could go rent or buy there to before I go see about getting me one of these steel containers?
I don't have a recommendation. I've got this unit. It's actually an old Russian unit that I got, years ago, and it's still working perfectly. I looked at some of the newer units when Fukushima happened, but I wound up not buying one. So you're really going to have to go pick one out for yourself. But don't get the real bottom line cheap ones. You need one that will hopefully detect alpha rays and is going to keep a good, accurate count. This is a time to spend money for quality, if you're really concerned about that. And certainly right now, a lot of people along the west coast of Canada and the United States have reason to be concerned because the North Pacific Gyre Current, actually, we're lucky here in Hawaii. Most of it's missed us, but it's definitely heading for the North American, the west coast of the North American continent. The music's here. We got to take a break for Phil Shafley and news. Thank you for the call, Eugene. Good luck finding yourself a good radiation meter. We'll be back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And those selected 911 calls from Newtown have been released and played. And as expected, they were cherry-picked to underscore the drama and the panic and the horror, and the corporate media is going on, reinforcing the official legend, guns are bad, we got to get rid of the guns, it was all the fault of those guns in high-capacity magazines. And we know that there are serious problems with that story, especially because the idea that he could get a long gun into that school through that school's existing security system never made any sense, because if you were going to the school. Remember, they're tearing it all down now so that nobody can go in and find out what was going on. But to get into the school, you had to basically enter this sort of a little lock area. There was an exterior door, and you would be in this little closet. There was a TV camera where a school official could look at you and then hit the button to let you in the inner door. Now, getting a handgun through there, yes. Getting an AR-15, no. Wasn't going to happen. But the big issue here is that the Newtown shooting, like Columbine, like the Batman shooting, like all the vast majority of these other shootings involved perpetrators whose brains were scrambled on these prescription antidepressants, and nobody wants to talk about that. Because Big Pharma has big bucks, and corporate media is dependent on those well-produced, expensive commercials to sell you the newest medication, even though they've got that little voice at the end that says, if you take the medication, you could actually die. And if you do, it's not our fault because we did warn you. Congress held hearings on the issue of prescription antidepressants leading to episodes of irrational violence and suicide. They will do nothing because Big Pharma are huge campaign contributors. And it's a big problem. And like I said, there was this video, I'm going to hunt it down and repost it, where one of the prosecutors in Connecticut was being asked by some of the families of the victims, you know, what about this idea that Lanza was on this medication, and it just put him over the edge. And this prosecutor said, well, look, even if in this one case the medication made him do it, that's not important information for the American people to know. Yeah, it is. Because either this prosecutor's an idiot or he's not done his due diligence, because it's not this one case. There's a website, ssristories.com, and it contains hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of documented cases of people either on or trying to withdraw from these medications who are just driven absolutely crazy and tried to kill other people or themselves, in many cases succeeded. And behind all of that are all the other people who are on these medications who may not have killed anybody, but may have gotten into bar fights that they might otherwise not have done so, may have slapped around their domestic partner in an act of violence that might not have happened if their brains were not on these medications. And this is the real scam. But no, we got to blame the guns. The guns are the problem. The guns are all the fault. The guns, you know, we've got to take away the guns here. Take your pills, give us your guns. That's the attitude we're getting from the government here right now. All righty, let's see. Getting back on here. Stuart Littlewood is out with a new article over at Veterans News Now saying, oh, I guess so Iran is Britain's enemy now. Because even in the wake of the P5+1 deal, we are seeing politicians in Europe, Canada, Great Britain, here in the United States of America, all of whom are really good friends with Israel, screaming the deal won't work, the deal shouldn't work, the deal should be canceled. The European Union is imposing their own new sanctions on Iran, despite the P5+1 deal. Netanyahu's openly talking about just attacking Iran. They're desperate for the war with Iran. And everybody's got their own reason. Remember, wars and assassinations are never carried out for just one purpose. There's a group of people, all who have their own reasons for doing what they're doing, who all get together and make whatever they need to happen, happen. John F. Kennedy assassination, a good example. The Texas oil billionaires were all upset about the oil depletion allowance. CIA was upset about the Bay of Pigs, the firing of Allen Dulles, and Kennedy's desire to basically weaken the agency, take away some of its covert action authority and give it back to the Pentagon. You had the financial people were angry over Kennedy's issuance of the United States note. You had Israel was angry with Kennedy over his refusal to allow them to acquire nuclear weapons. Johnson was upset with Kennedy because Kennedy was going to replace him in the second term. Organized crime was angry with Kennedy because they felt he had turned on them by sicking his brother Robert Kennedy on organized crime. All these people had a different reason for assassinating John F. Kennedy, and they all got together and made it happen. Same thing with the war in Iran. Israel wants Iran smashed as a threat to its regional power. The United States wants war with Iran to reimpose the petrodollar on Iran so that Iran's oil is only sold for the U.S. dollars. The financial interests want Iran placed under the control of a private central bank. And on, and they're all getting together and saying, yes, we've got to go to war with Iran. They're trying to restart the war with Syria. And it's a failed policy because more countries are leaving the dollar more quickly than the U.S. can conquer them. The yuan is closing in on the dollar as the global currency. And if they persist in this policy of trying to use military force to reimpose Bretton Woods and the petrodollar on the rest of the world, it will inevitably mean war with Russia and China that the U.S. is not equipped to win conventionally, and that means the nukes are going to come out. And that is why I am so opposed to allowing this to go any further along this road of insanity. And, of course, our politicians, they've got all those bunkers. They've been stocking them up with food and everything. You paid for them. You won't be allowed in them. All the one-percenters, they've got their super bunkers and their prepper stuff built underneath their house here. They're going to be, oh, well, yeah, we'll kill off 90% of the human population, and boy, won't planet Earth be beautiful and lovely for those of us who had the money to survive. Now, apparently, Joe Biden is over in China right now, openly encouraging the Chinese youth to defy their government and their leadership. This is the beginning of a destabilization program, like we're seeing in the Ukraine, like we saw in Iran in 2009, leading to an eventual conflict. Our government is actually seriously planning to go to war against China, and it's going to be a mistake. The United States does not have the manpower for a ground invasion of China. China's got the manpower, but not the transportation for a ground invasion of the United States. And again, that means it's going to wind up with a nuclear exchange. But it'll be worth it if we keep the world safe for that Federal Reserve note, I guess. Meanwhile, getting back to Iran, House Majority Leader Eric Cantor, who is, of course, one of the most ardent, if not virulent, supporters of Israel in the United States government, has told House Republicans he wants a bipartisan bill to define what would be the acceptable outcome of a final deal with Iran. In other words, the renewed negotiations with Iran, it's not up to the P5+1 to say what is a workable deal. Eric Cantor wants Congress to pass a bill saying this is what the acceptable deal is, and if Iran doesn't agree to it, we will go to war. They're trying to end-run the P5+1 because they weren't supposed to actually come up with a deal. We just let them do it, so it looked like we're trying to find a peaceful solution. And they went ahead and did a deal? What kind of nonsense is this? So Eric Cantor is out there trying to get a bill through Congress saying, we, the Congress, will decide on behalf of the P5+1 what the acceptable final deal will be. Which is basically telling all of the non-United States members of the P5+1, we don't care what you think. It's a unilateral world. We rule everything in the name of Israel, because if Bibi Netanyahu isn't happy, then we are not happy. Constituents, I don't need no stinking constituents. And it goes on from there. The people who want the war are desperate to get it. How desperate? I don't know. Christmas is a really good opportunity for a symbolic false flag. We've got to be thinking about that. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. Oh, hi, America. Welcome back to the show. And for those of you who don't already know, the Christmas music that we're using as our bumps was all written and created by my lovely wife, Claire. And as a matter of fact, tomorrow is our 20th wedding anniversary. And it's a milestone. I have a lot of people 20 years ago were betting money it wasn't going to last more than a few weeks. I have to go back and collect those bets. I can use the money. All righty, so we're talking about this attempt to somehow ignore the fact that the P5+1 and Iran came to an agreement to reduce sanctions on Iran, and Iran would back off on some of its enrichment activity and give it a 6-month wait for everybody to calm down and come back and say, let's work out a final solution, which looks like progress to ordinary peace-loving human beings, but of course that is very upsetting to the money junkies and to Israel and to the Israel firsters, and they're trying to find some way that they can reimpose sanctions and say, well, these weren't covered by the P5+1, so it's okay for us to go ahead and do that. Forgetting that the agreement by the P5+1 is a treaty, and every member of the P5+1 who is not complying with that deal is basically violating a treaty, which means they're in violation of international law. But they're in this real rush to just somehow kill the deal with Iran. We were talking earlier in the week about how Netanyahu has ordered the Mossad to find, meaning make up, evidence that Iran is not complying with the deal. And Netanyahu has already said Israel's not bound by the P5+1 deal, which is rather amazing considering how hard he was trying to interfere with it. And that he reserves the right to attack Iran at any time he feels it's absolutely necessary, kicking off a wide regional war. And, of course, Israel will then stand back and turn to America and say, oh, please help. There's evil anti-Semites and Jew haters. They're attacking our country. Save us, save us. And the U.S. government will say, sure, we'll send a couple million of our kids to catch the bullets before they can harm those precious Israelis. I don't know about you, but I'm tired of this country having to pay all of Israel's bills and clean up all of Israel's messes. I really, really am. But the hardliners are absolutely ganging up in the Congress, in the Parliament, in the European Parliament, to somehow find a way to move the war agenda before. And I understand why there's so much support here in the United States of America, because this agenda of dollarification of the world, of bringing the world back into Bretton Woods, it's an all-or-nothing deal. They can't just have these countries over here using the dollar, because the other nations of the world will go to those countries not using the dollar to conduct business, because then they're not paying that uplift, that extra vigorish that has to go to the U.S. Federal Reserve to conduct business. So it's an all-or-nothing deal, and that's why they're desperate to get this thing going, because when this war of dollarification, the latest chapter in All Wars Are Bankers' Wars, when it stumbles and falls, the party is over. That's how desperate they are. Meanwhile, getting back over to the situation in the Ukraine, and more observers are starting to realize it looks like it's a deliberate, covert campaign of destabilization and overthrow, just like they were trying to do in Iran back in 2009. And Putin is out there saying this is obviously an organized program. This is somebody's covert operation to try and destabilize the Ukraine government and punish them, remove them from power for refusing to join the European Union. And apparently there are European Union officials who are openly saying to the people of Ukraine, rise up, throw out your government, you want to be part of the European Central Bank. And it's a violation of Ukrainian sovereignty, just as it is for Joe Biden to be in China telling their young people, throw off your government, you want to have a private central bank and be part of America. There are just too many people in positions of power and authority who think a new global world war is just a really cool idea. It's going to solve all our problems. Get rid of the surplus population. Let us use up all our old military stockpiles so we can start taxing people to build new military stockpiles. Now, Russia has also come out. There have been some very ugly incidents in Syria recently, including apparently the capturing and abuse of a dozen Christian nuns by the Syrian militants, the hired mercenaries, the ones who are much more into Islam than the regular hired mercenaries who really don't care one way or the other. Russia is saying these terror attacks against religious figures and worship sites do need to stop. And he's absolutely right. And it has reached a point, and this is probably going to come as a huge shock to America's foreign policy establishment. The non-Muslim Syrian rebels have announced they are willing to kiss and make up with Assad and join the government troops against the Al-Qaeda Islamic hired mercenaries. So we've got a big chunk of the battlefield getting ready to switch sides. Think back World War II and Italy. Italy was part of the Axis, and they were with the Nazis and the Japanese, and then they shot Mussolini, which was a really good idea, and they promptly changed sides. And this looks like it's going to happen inside Syria. Now, there's an article that came out of Veterans News Now that said the greatest danger, and it simply lays out the world is being dragged to a potential global nuclear war by Israel, by Netanyahu. And the call is going out. You have to stop this obsession with Netanyahu. You've got to stop thinking that whatever he says you must do. Embrace the Geneva deal with Iran. And you've got to start kicking those AIPAC parasites off of Capitol Hill and start running this nation for the benefit of this nation and with an eye toward what's going to happen to the whole world if this rush to war is not stemmed right now. They're calling it the March of Fools, and they're absolutely right. And all these people, all these politicians, they're looking to do favors for each other. They're looking to do favors for their sponsors and their backers, whoever's got the incriminating negatives on them. And nobody's really looking at the overview of just how dangerous this all is if it goes out of control. And it will go out of control because, precisely, nobody is maintaining an overview. Israel has blocked yet another humanitarian flotilla from Gaza This one was trying to sail out from Gaza, out past the 6-mile limit that Israel sets on Gaza's fishermen. In other words, if you are in Gaza and you are fishing to provide food to the Gazan people, Israel only allows you to go 6 miles out into the Mediterranean. You go any further, they'll shoot at you. Israel is again bulldozing more homes in the West Bank to make way for Jewish-only settlements. The Palestinian leadership is saying that unless settlement construction is frozen, there's no point in continuing with the peace talks, which of course would suit Israel just fine. That's why they started accelerating the settlement building when the peace talks were being proposed. So the Palestinians would quit and Israel could say, we wanted to talk peace. They quit. It's all their fault. Israel's increasing the annexation pace. They're going faster and faster and grabbing more and more. And there's a very alarming humanitarian health crisis taking place in Gaza right now. Because of the blockade, Gaza must get fuel for their electrical power station from Israel. And Israel has been cutting it back. Now, for a while, it was simply you had electricity in your homes for only 8 hours a day. Israel's rationale for starving Gaza of electric power is because terrorists use electricity. That's their theory. But now they have cut off the fuel so much that the power station simply isn't running. Everybody's back to candle power. And worse, the sewage treatment plant in Gaza cannot operate because it's electrically driven. Now, why this is a crisis and why it may be intentional, we'll talk about when we come back from these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're talking about what's going on in Gaza, where Israel has basically cut off all fuel to their electrical power station. And it's at the point now where there's no electricity in Gaza, other than that being produced by portable generators and battery power and so forth. And the real problem is that the sewage treatment plant has shut down, and raw sewage is basically starting to spread throughout Gaza. Now, raw sewage is a psychological weapon. The Israelis have been using that. These Jewish-only communities in the West Bank love to pour their raw sewage onto the farmland of the Palestinians nearby in an attempt to just encourage them to go away. But I think there's something else going on here, because when you have a high population density, as there is the case in Gaza, a lot of people crammed into a very tight space, and you do not have basic sanitation, you have a classic situation for an out-of-control epidemic to break out that would just kill a huge amount of the population. That's why the Black Plague ran so out of control in Europe. Lack of sanitation, people were just tossing the tosspots out the window, and it just created an environment where the disease could just flash through the entire population. And it may be that Israel is hoping that's what's going to happen, to sweep through the entire Gaza Strip, wipe out most of the people. A final solution to the Palestinian question might even start one once they've set up this perfect little growth medium for an illness. Now, you need to understand biological warfare is not a recent development. It has been used throughout history. People laying siege to a city, using catapults to throw plague victim bodies or eat poisonous snakes or whatever into the city, poisoning the water supply with things like ergot. And if you read your Bible in 1 Samuel, it talks about how the Philistines conquered the ancient Israelites and captured the Ark of the Covenant, and then all of a sudden the Philistines were struck down by bubonic plague. And after the plague had completely decimated their population, they brought the Ark of the Covenant back to Israel, to the Israelites, along with some tributes, which were gold spheres, thought to represent the buboes of the plague, and 5 golden mice, which may have been a message to the Israelites that the Philistines knew just how and by whom the plague got inflicted on them. So I think this idea of cutting off the power to the sewage plant, it's more than just spite. Israel may be hoping for a medical disaster or crisis to solve their problems in Gaza for them. Apparently some numbers have just come out. With the new launch of Obamacare, and Obama's out there talking about the website says fixed and it's going to service 800,000 users per day. And apparently the numbers are out for the first 2 days of this week. And a grand total of 29,000 people enrolled over 2 days at the new Obamacare website. That's 14,000 14,500, 14,500 per day average, which tells us that people are still going to be trying to sign on to this thing all the way up until Election Day next year, which is why that statement by the chair of the Democratic National Committee that all the Democrat candidates are going to be running on the Obamacare issue makes no sense at all, unless they want to hand the entire White House and, well, not the White House, but the Congress to Republican control and let them get the blame for the coming crash. Now, getting back to the situation in Israel, there's a lot of talk about the so-called Prouder Plan, and it has caused quite a bit of controversy. There are protests against it in the United States, in Great Britain, even within Israel itself. And basically what it is Israel has crafted a law saying it is legal for us to ethnically cleanse the Palestinians off of our land and build Jewish-only settlements. And they're talking about the West Bank. And it seems like if you look at a map of Israel and Palestine, going back to the founding of Israel itself, and you will see very clearly it is Israel that's trying to wipe Palestine off the map, not the other way around. And ever since Palestine was recognized as a state by the United Nations, Israel has been very upset. In fact, the United Nations has declared 2014 as the year of solidarity with Palestine. And Israel appears to be acting like it's going to be the year to erase what's left of Palestine off the map by any way that they can. The IDF has served notification for the complete demolition of a Palestinian village, Kirbet al-Jamal, in the northern Jordan Valley. 150 people are living there, maintaining their farms, their olive trees, just minding their own business, and the IDF is going to say, we're kicking you out. It's ethnic cleansing. But we're not supposed to say that, because if we criticize Israel for their policies against the Palestinians, oh, we're just being anti-Semites and so forth and so on. Justice is supposed to be blind. It's a crime. You look at the crime. You don't look at the perpetrators. You don't look at the victims. You just deal with that. Well, that doesn't apply in Israel, because back in 2005, there was a terror attack by an Israeli, Idan Natan Zada, who basically boarded a bus full of Palestinians and set out to kill as many of the Palestinians on the bus as possible with his IDF-issued rifle. He killed 4 people, wounded 23. And he was stopped only when some of the Palestinians on the bus overpowered him and killed him in what is clearly an act of self-defense for anybody but Israel. Because an Israeli court sentenced those people who killed this guy who was killing the Palestinians to 2 years in prison. Now, the Pope just did Benjamin Netanyahu just did a charm offensive trip up to Rome to visit with Pope Francis. And a lot of people were scratching their head over the fact that as a gift to the pontiff, Benjamin Netanyahu gave him a book authored by Netanyahu's father, who is an Israeli historian, talking about the Spanish Inquisition. And a lot of people were saying, what are you thinking? Now, I wondered if maybe Netanyahu was sending a message to the Pope not to criticize Israel, or Israel would use their captive media assets around the world to remind the world about the witch burnings and the child molestation and the Spanish Inquisition. Well, whatever the motive might have been, it appears not to have worked, because pretty much everybody is saying that Netanyahu absolutely cratered whatever he was going to try and do up at the Vatican. It was very insensitive to hand that book, and that he may have overstated his hand. And again, Netanyahu is just so used to doing whatever he wants and handing out insults left and right, and he doesn't seem to realize the world is not as tolerant and accepting of Israel's arrogance as it once was. And so Netanyahu's stepped in it yet again here. Now, getting back over to China, this is a very interesting story, and it gets right back to what I was saying about the yuan now having passed the euro in popularity as a global trade reserve currency. Over at Investment Watch blog, they're reporting on how China's official news outlet coming out and saying boldly what everybody is already thinking. The world should start considering and planning a de-Americanized world. In other words, the United States control is on the wane. Their ability to force nations to go through the dollar and have to borrow those dollars at interest from the Federal Reserve is on the wane. And we're looking at a world not too far off where the United States is not going to be a superpower, even with its mighty military arsenal, assuming it works. And it's time to start making plans for that. Just like I keep telling you, it's time for the American people to start seriously thinking what kind of a nation we want, what kind of an economy we want in this land when the current system implodes, as seems inevitable at this stage. Now, I want to talk a little about the NSA because global outrage to the NSA and to the other nations assisting, the so-called Five Eyes, continues to grow. And there's extreme anger coming out of the Indonesian government regarding the spying on and tapping of their officials. And again, to give the NSA a little bit of leeway here, we sort of expect governments to spy on other governments. The issue here is the spying on ordinary law-abiding citizens, or at least those who are not able to come up with their own systems of encryption like we did here at whatreallyhappened.com. But it is the political fallout continues, and now we're hearing the United Nations is going to investigate NSA, GCHQ agency spying in areas and contexts where it's really not appropriate and a violation of human rights and international law. So it's starting to catch up with them. I'm going to take a break for commercials here. Phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. So the United Nations is now going to investigate this whole NSA, GCHQ spying based on Edward Snowden's revelations. How the U.S. and British intelligence are monitoring ordinary law-abiding citizens' conversations, emails, text messages. Because it is a violation of the laws in the respective countries, and it arrogates to the NSA a huge amount of power if they are able to acquire information embarrassing to ordinary citizens or chief justices of the United States Supreme Court in order to coerce compliance with an agenda. That's not democracy. It's not even a republic. That is dictatorship right there. Now, over in Britain, The Guardian has said that basically they have only published about 1% of the revelations that Edward Snowden gave them. The British government is holding hearings. They've had the editor of The Guardian over there. They're hemming and hawing and trying to basically sell the idea that in reporting on government wrongdoing is somehow aiding terrorists, and that those who do report on government wrongdoing can be charged under the terrorism laws and sent off to Guantanamo or Abu Ghraib or that new place they just uncovered in Poland and dealt with severely. And no, telling the truth about what government is doing isn't aiding terrorism anywhere. It is embarrassing to the government, and embarrassing the government is not a crime. Certainly under the First Amendment. But these governments are all in a panic because their credibility is crumbling in front of the eyes of their people. They're trying to figure out some way they can stem this collapse of their legitimacy. And of course, they've reached the stage where everything they do to try and stop the process only makes it look worse. When you confine people to free speech zones, or you have no free speech zones, or you try and criminalize asking a question, or finding out the information for yourself, that only hammers home the point. You're dealing with a government engaged in outright tyranny. Now, apparently concerned over the fact that we're into the holiday season and NSA employees are going to be spending time with their friends and family over the holidays, the NSA has issued a holiday talking points memo. They're giving this to their employees to say, this is what you tell people who criticize, ask questions about the NSA. And I got hold of a copy of the NSA's official Holiday Talking Points memo, and it reads, "We see you when you're sleeping. We know when you're awake. We know if you've been bad or good, so be good for goodness sake, or else we will waterboard you." And that apparently is the NSA's answer to all those family members who are looking at the NSA employees and saying, you know, we don't really have a lot of respect for you guys anymore. Was that you prowling around my email, looting the images directory on my machine? Now, we know that governments around the world, not just the United States, are very concerned about the growing online commerce, Bitcoin, various other virtual currencies. And for a while, there was this operation called the Silk Road, which was apparently this sort of dark side of the universe version of eBay, where anybody could go in using anonymous browsers and Tor and redirects and proxies and purchase things using Bitcoins that were illegal. Apparently you could buy pirated movies, pirated music. Apparently you could buy drugs. And it was basically shut down and driven out of business. It was almost immediately replaced with a new one called the sheep marketplace. And it went out and apparently took something like $100 million in orders before it vanished. And nobody knows where the money went. And they're saying, was it a scam? Yeah, probably. But I have to ask the question if this sheep marketplace was a scam set up by the government itself, possibly by the FBI, in order to burn people and discourage them from going to online commerce that is outside the control of the bankers and the government. You don't want to go and do business there. You need to go to the shopping mall, or you need to go to the online providers that we know and we're in bed with, because we know, like eBay and Facebook and the rest of it, they're cooperating with the NSA. And so the speed with which this operation started up and then vanished feels like resources of a nation state to me. Now, again, coming out of Great Britain, there is a British company that has demonstrated a prototype of a device that will stop cars and vehicles using a blast of radio waves. And apparently it's called the RF Safe Stop. Now, this is not for cars equipped with a remote shutdown capability that they're talking about here in the United States. This is simply a device that hits a car with such a powerful blast of radio waves that the vehicle's electronic systems get befuddled and the engine will shut down. So far, so good. Ignoring the fact that you're potentially cooking the occupants of the vehicle at the same time. The problem is, I think, making this public is now carjackers know they can do this. And they'll just go get an old Klystron tube out of an old microwave oven and figure out how to do that to cars. And worse, now we know it can be done to airplanes. Now, for people who work with radar and radio, it's been known that can be a problem. When the Aegis ships are in port, they are banned from using their big 6-megawatt radars because of the damage they can do to vehicles and aircraft in the area. And now, all of a sudden, this British company has sort of advertised to the criminals of the world that, yeah, all they need to do is grab a really powerful radio emitter from an abandoned microwave oven, and they can freeze a car in its track and get in there and steal whatever's in there. I think this would have been a piece of technology that was best kept under wraps. Sometimes they get very, very reckless about this stuff. As I mentioned earlier in the show, the TSA is expanding its range of activities at the airport, and now they're talking about having uniformed officers go out to your car left in the airport parking lot while you're flying off to wherever you're going to, breaking into the car and searching it to make sure that you didn't leave Osama bin Laden locked in the trunk of your car. And, of course, if you come back from your trip to Las Vegas and your stereo is missing and your DVD or your CD collection is missing or anything you left in the car is gone, oh, it must have been a car thief. Wouldn't be the TSA, even though the TSA had been caught stealing from luggage so many times I've lost count, and there's no reason to assume they will not be just as advantageous of the situation when they're out there legally given the authority to break into people's cars in the airport parking lot. But because they're out there working harder to make sure that you're safe from the scourge of your latest tablet, they're raising the fees. And now the airlines are saying they're going to have to pass those fee increases on to airline travelers, which means now you will be paying more money to have your crotch groped, to share whatever contagious illnesses your fellow passengers ahead of you in the line were carrying, to have your wives and daughters publicly humiliated, to have your laptops dropped and wrecked, and your personal electronic items that are not dropped and broke stolen. Such a deal. Such a deal. And a reminder that in all of its years of operations, the TSA has not detected a single real terrorist. Not once. And everything they do is a violation of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights here. Getting back to Iran, story that just came through here. Apparently, House Armed Services Committee member Representative Duncan Hunter is now out there saying that the United States should nuke Iran's nuclear facilities. They want their war. They're trying as hard as they can get it. And you need to call Congress and stand up to them and say, do not do this. If you want a war with Iran, you go fight it yourself. And you leave us, the rest of us, alone. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open. 800-313-9443. 800-313-9443. Dan the Man is now in the control room, managing the Truth Warp Drive and ready to answer the phone when you call on in. With the new numbers that they just released about the performance of the Obamacare website over the last 2 days falling far, 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 far short of what we were assured it was going to be doing, it is inevitable, obviously, that along with the carbon tax, the government's going to be pushing for more taxes on you because they're absolutely convinced you still got lots and lots of money in your pocket that you don't really need, and they just are going to help themselves about that. And so we're just seeing this report came over TV, and we've got a members post at whatreallyhappened.com, where Democrats in Congress are proposing a doubling of the gasoline tax, which of course means not only will you be paying more to put gasoline in your vehicles, but everything that you buy that is transported by gasoline, such as food, appliances, whatever, will be more expensive because those shipping companies aren't going to just eat that tax increase, they'll pass it on to you. Taxes always flow downhill to fall on we little people, as it were. We're going to take a phone call here. John in Barbados. Aloha, John. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. Just to cover the subject we were discussing before the break, that little gizmo that's been invented that can the UK to stop cars dead. An ideal device to knock these drones out of the sky along the street.
It's a very, very good application, yes.
Actually, I did send a similar email to the Iranian embassy in London telling them how to manufacture the same sort of device to take the drones down over Iran.
Again, you know, and again, you have to be very cautious about this. But if you found, one of the larger, more powerful microwave ovens in the trash, and you know how to take out that klystron tube, you could use that to point up at some of these little tiny drones, painted with the logos of Amazon and Domino's Pizza, but are actually working for the police. And they're not shielded from radio energy. You could probably fry them pretty good.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't need anything powerful for these tiny drones, but certainly you can improve your privacy by taking them down.
Well, at the very least, you could overwhelm their radio circuits, so they're no longer under control of the dirty old man in the van who's peeking in bedroom windows, and they'd probably just fall out of the sky on that one.
This technology has been done for quite.
Well, something that was learned the hard way all the way back in Vietnam is the more advanced and complicated the technology is, the easier it is to find ways to destroy it. the U.S. was starting to deploy aircraft with terrain-following radar. The original model for air combat in Vietnam was the planes were flying very, very high and dropping bombs from a very high distance, and then, of course, the North Vietnamese started getting surface-to-air missiles that could very easily hit those aircraft way up in the sky that were already flying at the top of the envelope. So the doctrine was changed for following the terrain, being very low, and whipping past so fast they couldn't get the missiles off. And what the Vietnamese realized is they could take all their old metal trash, tin cans, aluminum foil, whatever, load it into a mortar and just lob it up in front of the oncoming planes, and the radar would misread it as a hill or a cliff and just pull the plane way up into the sky. And if it didn't break the airplane from the sudden G's, it would put it up where it could be hit with anti-aircraft fire.
That reminds me of my days in the Air Force. The Vulcan aeroplane had an X-band radar with a steerable waveguide, which pushed out, I think it was 18 kilowatts, but the 18 kilowatts was in literally a pencil beam.
Yes.
And at 3 miles away, you could knock out the radar dish on a following fighter who was coming to attack you with his missiles. Literally, you fired this thing straight down his radar dish, and it would burn out all the electronics.
Yeah, you can really do it. It's called a Zorch, and as a matter of fact, I know there were some discussions where these super powerful radars on the Aegis ships could be used as weapons themselves by simply dwelling the beam on an incoming target and cook it. Now, the modern planes coming out of Russia and China are RF shielded to protect the pilots and the electronics. Apparently, for some reason, they didn't do that to the F-35. Another whole story entirely. Anything else, John?
Oh, no, Michael. Well, it's nice to have you back. I'm listening to your show daily, and, yep, I'm enjoying it.
All right. Well, thank you very much, and have some of that beautiful Mongay rum for me, all right? We're going to switch over to Obi in Colorado. Aloha, Obi. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, I just wanted to talk about the global warming, and I think that we need to buy Al Gore another yacht because it's 15 degrees here, and we're snowing, and we're going to be to -4 tomorrow morning. And I just figured, well, since this is global warming, I guess Al Gore needs another yacht.
Well, wait a minute. I'm sorry. It's snowing there? I mean, 10 years ago they were telling us snow was a thing of the past, that we would have to describe to our children what it was like to build snowmen and snow women and snow dogs and so forth and so on. But you're absolutely right. There's a major winter storm throughout the Central Rockies and the Midwest, and it seems to be getting here a little late, but there's definitely another record-setting winter here. We've already set nearly 1,000 new record low temperatures. Over last week, 205 snowfall records were set, 969 low maximum, and 203 low minimum temperatures were set. And it's just all over the place. The global sea ice area is the highest it's been since 1994 and looks to be on track to set a new all-time record. The reality is we're going into a new Maunder minimum, and Russia Today actually put out a very interesting article saying that all of this warming theory and hysteria was never based in science. It was always based in computer models, and computer models aren't the real world. They model something based on a set of initial assumptions. The models are not all-inclusive. It's always a very narrow context model, and it doesn't really produce anything of any real value at predicting what's going to go on. The only purpose of a model is saying this might happen in this limited set of circumstances. Again, these computer models don't take into account the fact that the sun's energy output changes, the amount of solar radiation, particulate radiation coming into the atmosphere, which can control cloud formation. Those are not in the model. None of the models account for the heat being pumped into the world's oceans by the active undersea volcanoes and thermal vents, because nobody knows how many of those are down there. It was just an agenda that was set. We're going to scare the world into paying a carbon tax to save them all from global warming. And we're going to fund the scientists who will come up with scholarly-looking papers that make it seem like we're right and we're all in trouble and we need to sell everybody a solution. And the real world and nature did not go along with the agenda. And this is going to be a very, very rough winter. We have snow here in Hawaii, down there on the peaks of Mauna Kea, Mauna Loa, and I think Haleakala. I haven't checked the webcam yet. But, yeah, it's another rough winter, and they're still out there talking about carbon taxes and carbon credits. Apparently, Australia just went through a change of government, and the reason the old government was voted out of office was their climate policies, including a carbon tax and emissions trading. The new incoming government has just announced their new pollution plan, which once you get past the name and actually read it, it's just another emissions trading scam because they can make money off of it. And that's what it is. And again, looking at the hard winters we're having, it's absolute complete nonsense, but they're still doing it because they can get a lot of money, you know, basically for free, for selling non-delivery of a commodity, carbon dioxide.
Well, I'll be thinking about you down there in nice warm Hawaii because our high tomorrow is supposed to be 10.
Send pictures. I want pictures. I want pictures of the snow and the ice and frozen stuff. We got to take a break. More about global warming when we come back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And as long as Obi got us onto the subject of global warming, we did say yesterday we were going to get into this. The carbon Nazis are still out there trying to figure out some way they can scare you that climate change will destroy life here on Earth, like a nuclear war over the U.S. dollar won't, and trying to basically justify new fees, new carbon taxes, whatever, to save the planet Earth from you icky-poo human beings out there. Interesting article came out of the Telegraph in Great Britain, looking back at Britain's commitment to combat climate change and realizing that the 85 billion pounds spent by the government really didn't accomplish much of anything, was costly and excessive. It's another case of the government spending huge amounts of money to solve a non-existent problem, which means, of course, they don't really accomplish anything because the problem really wasn't there. It was just propaganda. Another article coming out of The Spectator in Great Britain saying the problem is not global warming. In Britain, people are dying of the cold because the global warming policies have driven up fuel costs so high that people on pensions who are already struggling to deal with that bedroom tax are cutting down their heating to the point where they are risking their health. And last winter, it is now estimated there were 31,000 unnecessary deaths in England and Wales among British pensioners who died of the cold because they could no longer afford to heat their homes because of the global warming taxes. That is an illustration of how incredibly heartless government is. They're not really concerned with your life and your health, especially if you're too old to make any more money. Oh, they're pensioners, they're retirees. Yeah, we can't make any more money off of them. Let them go off and die someplace. Lower the health care costs. British local councils under financial pressure cutting home care visits for the elderly and disabled. Now, my wife and I have often viewed that the true measure of a society is how committed they are to the care of those who are disadvantaged and fragile. We're seeing all over the place where, let them freeze to death here. Let the homeless go someplace else. Let them starve to death. People are concerned about the provisions of Obamacare, where medical care is going to be rationed and doled out based on whether or not the person being cared for can return to productivity. In other words, if you're a good little worker, they'll take care of you. But if you're past your working years, you get put down on the list. We're being treated like livestock, like cattle, not like human beings. It continues to accelerate here. All righty, let's see. I want to back up here a little bit. We were talking the other day about how even in the aftermath of that embarrassing revelation of September 10th, 2001, that the Pentagon had just somehow misplaced $2 trillion tax dollars and they couldn't find it, and that was on top of another trillion that had been admitted to even earlier. Should have been the big financial military scandal of the decade, but fortunately 24 hours after Don Rumsfeld got up there and said, hey, we don't know where it went. 9/11 happened. One of the planes crashed into the Pentagon, right into the offices of the accountants trying to find where the money went. How very convenient for somebody that was. But apparently the missing money problem has continued. And now they're beginning to realize, again, the Pentagon doesn't know where a lot of the money goes to. And there's an article run by Reuters saying the Pentagon's doctoring their ledgers, trying to hide epic amounts of wasteful spending of your money. And apparently, they discovered in this report that the Pentagon is, for all intents and purposes, they're just making up the numbers to make the Navy, this was in the Navy they were looking at, to make the Navy's totals match that of the Treasury. Treasury says, we sent you this much money. Navy says, blah, 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 blah. This is where we spent it. And they're just making it up. They don't know where it went. Huge amount, vast amounts of money. If you've never been involved with a military project, you cannot begin to appreciate the difference in scale of spending that you're going to see. You and I, we have a little kitchen faucet of water. Most businesses have a garden hose of water to spend. These military contractors, they've got fire hoses at full blast. And it's just a whole different way of thinking about money. And they don't have to worry about it because it's not their money, it's yours. Now, an interesting little story. This came out of LiveLeak. We all know there's a tremendous concern about fracking, not just in this country, but around the world, any place where this practice is being put into place. And there is a huge amount of evidence that, contrary to the propaganda put out by the gas companies, these toxic fracking chemicals are, in fact, making their way back up the wells, getting into the drinking water. And once you've pumped all this stuff 2 miles down into the earth, there's really no easy way to get it all back. We had that caller into the show back in October who worked for one of the fracking companies that said they were making money by taking the toxic waste of various corporations. They didn't know what to do with it, and they just, for a fee, they'd pump that down into these fracking wells to get rid of it. And that's getting into the water. We've seen the documentaries about Gasland, where people are actually able to light a match to their tap water because of the methane leaking into it. And there are a lot of protests against it. And apparently over in Great Britain, it's reached a point, and this story was being covered out of Salford at Barton Moss in Greater Manchester, where social services was coming out to anti-fracking protests and telling the parents that being at that fracking protest was seen as endangerment of the children, and they were literally threatening to take the children away from the parents if they persisted in these fracking protests. That is how extreme it has gotten, where government is trying desperately to protect these gas companies because they're hugely profitable, and they need the energy supplies to power their economies and to power the war machine. And the fact that this practice is harmful to people, not their problem. Because these money junkies and these politicians, they're not living in the areas where the fracking is going on. They don't have to worry about what's in their tap water. They just don't care. They're just so caught up in this make more money, get more power, and they see their populations as simply a source of wealth. And those segments of the population that aren't a source of wealth are just, they're not even part of the calculations any longer. Now, getting onto the subject of computers, and I want to basically, before we hit the commercial break, 'tis the season for the scammers. And we know all during the year we get all kinds of email scams and malware attempts and everything. It does go up in December as the cyber criminals start saying, how am I going to pay for my Christmas shoplifting list? And it goes on. Like I said, my wife got one of her RFID-equipped credit cards scanned at the mall the other day. So you need to be really, really careful about what's going on. We're going to be talking about things to look for when you get suspicious emails. And we're going to be talking about a huge scandal involving esports entertainment, where they were using your computers, where you installed their software, they were using your computers to do Bitcoin mining. So we're going to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about computers and security, and because it is the holiday shopping season and the cyber criminals want to buy their brand new laptops and tablets and all the rest of the stuff for themselves and their friends, the amount of scams and attempted fraud does tend to go up at this time of year. As I mentioned earlier, if you have credit cards with built-in radio transponders, the so-called contactless cards, you should leave them at home unless you know for certain you're going to be using those. You should have a wallet or some kind of a holder that shields the radio antenna, or you should go to your credit card company and say, I don't want one of these. Because, you know, people are walking around the malls with a backpack and they've got a laptop and radio gear in there, and they're just sucking the information off the cards. And my wife got caught in one of those. Unfortunately, the credit card company reversed the charges because it was very obvious. We were not in Detroit at the time. But there's a lot of fraud going on out there, and there's a very wonderful article over at Tech Republic, 10 tips for spotting a phishing email. And they have a couple of good ideas in there. Now, there's one they don't have, and that is to look at the to address. When you get an email that says you have blah, 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 you want to look and see, is it addressed to your email address personally? If that to field is blank, if it says unidentified mailing list or some other such cover, or there's a whole bunch of names and addresses in there, it's usually a sign it's some kind of spam or malware. Most web browsers, or most email clients, it's certainly true with Outlook, if there's an email with a clickable link and the link looks like it goes to a legitimate website, hover your cursor over it, and down below it'll show you the actual link that's embedded. And if they don't match, that's absolutely a sign that you're dealing with somebody who's a crook. A lot of people will have misleading domain names where they'll set up a domain name that includes a legitimate domain at the very beginning of it, like Microsoft.com.testingplatform.whatever, and you need to watch out for those. Obviously, poor spelling and grammar is a dead giveaway. Any email that's asking you for personal information, just drop it in the bit bucket. Certainly, a bank is not going to send you an email requesting your account number because they already have it. And banks, as a matter of policy, do not conduct that kind of business via email. Absolutely, absolutely. The old thing about offers too good to be true, you know, the wife of a deposed African dictator isn't going to contact you at random to move all that money around. If you didn't initiate the action. We all get these things. You have won the lottery, blah, 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 blah. I'm sorry, I didn't enter the lottery. So you need to keep an eye out for these things. And again, the article is at whatreallyhappened.com, and you want to read it in full. But there's a lot of stuff going on out there. Now, to sort of wrap up, before we go back to the phones here, I want to wrap up on this story. Malwarebytes came out basically blowing the whistle on the esports entertainment toolbar for your computer. And what's really embarrassing about this is apparently in the end user license agreement, they actually lay out, we will be using your processor for our own activities and our own use. They didn't go into details, but it was right there in the end user license agreement, so nobody can complain. What you can do, of course, is deinstall. And Malwarebytes identified a product called Your Free Proxy software by We Build Toolbars LLC installs a program called Monitor.x, very benign name, but it turns out it's a Bitcoin miner. They're using your computer processor, your property, to mine Bitcoins for their profit. And that's really very inappropriate because these Bitcoin miners are intensive computer hogs. They will use up all of your CPU, and if you're equipped with a GPU in your computer, they'll use that because it's a cryptographic breaking process is what Bitcoin mining is. I still think that the Bitcoin mining system as a whole is a public key breaker. If you're into public key cryptography, the idea is you encode with your private key, you encode with somebody's public key, they decode with the private key. You can't go from the public to the private key, but it turns out, yes, with enough computer power, you absolutely can here. All right, we're going to go to the phones here. Chris in Las Vegas. Aloha, Chris. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
You were mentioning your wife's bad adventure at the mall with having her RFID card scammed at the local hacker central.
Yes.
Well, my sweetheart had the great advantage of running across some handicapped children who, for benefit, had made little credit card wallets out of Capri Sun packages, running a few stitches down them, to put your credit cards in to prevent those from being scammed by not penetrating the radio signals, effectively creating a Faraday cage for those devices.
Yeah, there's a lot of products. We used to have an advertiser that was selling them. They were heavy cardboard with a metal paint on them, and they really did work. What I've done with my card now, the replacement card that was sent to my wife doesn't have the RFID chip. And what I did is I simply took a ball-peen hammer to mine to make sure it's not going to work because there was no place around here I could actually use it as a contactless card except the local office supply place, and their system was always down, so there was no point in me even having that. They actually sell wallets now made out of steel wire mesh where you can block the signal. But the best thing of all to do is to tell your credit card company, I don't want these, and I think they're starting to phase them out because of all the fraud that has been done with them. And it goes back to something I said earlier. The more complex and high-tech the technology is, the easier and easier it is for people to find ways around it. And I think that's absolutely true. And so, yeah, if your credit card has one of these RFID chips in it, you should leave it at home unless you know for certain you're going to be needing it that day. And
and walk down with a radio transmitter that you don't know what sort of information about you is transmitting, that whether it's retailers or others around the retailers are able to grasp and find out about you is very disturbing to some of us.
Yeah, they might, for all we know, they might be reading your cards and going to the computer and finding out what your credit limit is. You know, if your card is almost maxed out, go away. I got to talk to this person here who's got a couple of $1,000 room on the card. But the real danger, of course, are these scammers who are walking around the malls. Right now, it's happening, where they're just reading off that information, and they sell that information to fraudsters in other part of the countries who go out and say, yes, I'm Claire Rivero, and give me 2 tickets for whatever it was they bought. They bought some tickets for some sporting event or something.
Well, you were talking about Bitcoin a little bit, and it has noted that the Bernanke has given some eye to Bitcoin as a possible alternative medium to the dollar, and that would cause me great concern because then I would wonder who really suggested the concept and implemented it, although there is one name that we constantly come up with. I think there's somebody behind that, and if you can create it with a keystroke, you can make it disappear with a keystroke. Abracadabra, now you see it, now you don't.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, when we talk about a currency in the blueprint for the new America, obviously electronically transmittable currency is an absolute necessity in the modern day and age, but ultimately it's got to be based on some commodity of known and accepted and recognized value, which is why, of course, we talk about the electro, where the electro is based on a kilowatt hour of electricity. Was absolutely going to stimulate power storage, power generation. People can put up windmills and solar panels on their home and literally create wealth out of sunlight and wind. The Treasury would simply tokenize and the electricity and manage it and basically go forward. And the whole idea is it's a unit of value everybody universally recognizes as having value, but it can be created in ample enough supply where it can't be hoarded and monopolized and manipulated the way silver and gold can be.
There's already a monetized system for keeping track of that. Kilowatts, watts, amperes, and ampere hours.
Well, that's exactly what I said. We've already got the units of measure for that. And, you know, it's an idea, and it's not original with me. It's been in some science fiction books before. But I think it's definitely a way to go. We certainly cannot have this debt-based, created out of thin air currency any longer. that enslaves us all to these bankers. I like silver and gold as a store of value, but I don't see them as a monetary base with our population growing the way it is. Again, because unless that commodity can grow and keep pace with the population, you're going to get into hoarding and manipulation and the games that the money junkies like to play. Okay?
Well, thank you so much, Michael.
All right, Chris, there. How's the weather? Is it snowing there yet?
Oh, we had a little bit of flurries around town, but nothing stuck, and it's a beautiful 45 to 50 degrees, sunshiny and bright and clear.
All right, well, have yourself a good day, and we're going to take a break for commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Last segment here. Got a couple of stories to follow up with. First of all, for those of you wondering, where's Ison, like where's Wally, it does now seem that Comet Ison was pulverized by tidal forces during its close encounter with the sun, and in any event, I would have expected that the volatiles in the comet, the part that produces the tail, probably were all cooked away during that encounter, and there wasn't anything coming out. The idea that Comet Ison had survived was based on seeing something continuing on the orbit, but that now appears to be a rapidly spreading cloud of very tiny debris, so the much heralded comet of the century is going to be a no-show. And for astronomy buffs, I know that's a disappointment, but that's kind of how these things really work. Now, getting back over to Fukushima, it's not getting a lot of coverage, but at this point it seems like they're trying to figure out some way to sell the idea of taking all of this accumulated, highly contaminated water and just dump it in the ocean. Because any other approach is going to cost way too much money, and money is precious. Even the IAEA is saying, yeah, you should just dump it in the ocean and let it dilute away, and that'll be just fine and dandy and good. And it really isn't, because as I mentioned before, a fish that is contaminated right off the beach of Fukushima is going to be just as contaminated when it is caught and eaten off the coast of California. Now, as they get further and further down into the ruins of those reactors, they're having to confront the fact that, yes, there were real China syndromes. They're starting to get into the cooling pools for the expired fuel rods. And they're discovering that the fuel rods are damaged, which increases the possibility of an accident as they try and remove them and take them away for processing. Because even though the fuel rods are no longer usable for power generation, they're still highly radioactive, and they are still capable of spontaneous fission if they get too close to each other. Normally in the cooling pools, they're kept separated by brackets. The water is filled with boron, which is a neutron inhibitor, to basically allow them to simply go on cooling, because left to themselves, left out in the air, they will heat up from decay processes. The isotopes created by fission will themselves start breaking apart and decaying into other elements, and they generate a huge amount of heat in the process. And now they're looking at Unit 3. Remember, that's the one we were talking about with the huge cloud that went overhead. And they're now saying that it appears there was possibly a second smaller explosion inside. They're calling it something of significance. But the reality is they're looking for the cheapest way out of it, and they're looking to find some way that they can convince the people of certainly the Pacific Basin, that it's going to be okay to simply dump all of this highly radioactive water into the Pacific Ocean, and hey, you won't get that much of it, therefore it's really okay. But again, exposure isn't the problem. Contamination is the problem. If you're exposed to radiation for a little bit and you walk away from it, that's the end of it. But if you inhale or you swallow one of these very tiny particles of radioisotope, it's the gift that keeps on giving. It just sits there embedded in your lung or embedded in your stomach, and it just goes on radiating the tissue around it until finally enough of the DNA is damaged where you start suffering the medical consequences. It's a very slow, painful way to die. And it's very alarming that in Japan, as here in the United States of America, the agenda seems to be to make the problem go away for the lowest cost possible. and not really care all that much what it does to the general population, whether it's Fukushima radiation in Japan, fracking byproducts here in the United States of America, oil and Corexit in the Gulf of Mexico. The actual health and well-being of the general population doesn't really seem to be that much of a factor. And it's a very revealing insight into the kind of people who seek positions of political power and what they really feel about the voters and the taxpayers. Meanwhile, speaking of Japan, here's a little interesting thing. A while back, a few years back, the University of Hawaii's Oceanographic Department, which operates a couple of deep-sea submersibles, garnered headlines when they located the Japanese miniature submarine sunk just outside the entrance to Pearl Harbor by the USS Ward at the opening of the attack on Pearl Harbor. Saturday is Pearl Harbor Day. And the Ward had insisted we saw the attack, we fired on the submarine, and for years and years the official U.S. government position is, oh, you guys just made it up. You were hallucinating. There was no reason to know the attack was coming, and your radio message, there was no reason to believe it. And then, of course, they located the miniature submarine, and it still has the visible shell hole in the conning tower where the Ward did shoot it. So it was vindication for the crew of the Ward, and a reminder that they knew something was going on hours before the air attack showed up. We'll be talking about Pearl Harbor on Friday and all of the accumulated evidence that not only did Franklin Roosevelt know the Japanese were coming to attack Pearl Harbor, he goaded them into it as his back door to get the United States into the war against Nazi Germany. It's yet another example of how this government will lie, cheat, and steal to get you to go along with what they want to do. War on Germany. Oh, nobody wants war on Germany. All right, we'll goad the Japanese into attacking us, and then we'll use that as our excuse to declare war on everybody, which is exactly what happened. So we'll be talking about that on Friday. Now, that was then. This is now. The same University of Hawaii Oceanographic Department just stumbled across the remains of the I-400. This was a Japanese super submarine. Now, unless you're a student of World War II naval assets, you may not know about this. Most people think of Japanese submarines, these little tiny submarines, because the crews were small. Let's be blunt about it. But Japan actually produced some super-sized submarines, and the I-400 was one of a class of submersible aircraft carriers, and I'm not kidding you about that. This was a giant submarine that underneath the conning tower had a watertight hangar in which were stored 2 collapsible airplanes, and the rear of the submarine had a catapult, and the planes themselves had floats on them so they could land on the ocean and be recovered and be put back in the hangar. And Japan had just pioneered this technology of being able to have a submarine deploy aircraft. It was a real game changer. And at the end of World War II, the United States Navy took the I-400 off the coast of Oahu, the southwest coast, and they sank it in 2,000 feet of water because they were terrified the Russians were going to get their hands on this technology and start developing submarines that could deploy warplanes. And so they sank it and said, that's it, the Russians will never get it. And quite by accident, because it wasn't where the Navy chart said it was supposed to be, the University of Hawaii Oceanographic people, they stumbled across it. And so whether they'll try and recover it, certainly they'll document it, but it's a reminder, there's a lot of stuff left over from the last World War out there that we're still stumbling across. On the nautical charts, they dumped a lot of chemical and biological weapons into the ocean, and there were marks on the chart saying, don't you dare fish here. And a lot of people are very worried. What happens when those drums and shell casings really corrode, if that stuff is still active in there? But again, the people who do these wars, they don't think about 10, 20, 30 years into the future. They want victory today at any cost. And we're seeing that same mindset in our Congress, with all these people who are out there saying, yes, let's go ahead and nuke Iran's nuclear facilities. Who cares if there's radiation all over the place? We must have victory. Victory at all costs. That's a sick, psychotic point of view, I think. All righty, so we're coming up here to the end of the show. A reminder that Claire will be with us on Friday. Wally Amos will be with us on Monday to talk about why he's no longer allowed to use the name Famous Amos. Michelle Rosen is tentatively scheduled to be on our show Tuesday to talk about the latest developments in the Tylenol poisoning case and the political machinations that are still going on 30 years after it happened to try and keep the truth from you, the American people. There's the music. It's time for me to go on out and get something done with the rest of the day. Until tomorrow, stay safe, stay angry, stay skeptical, make good choices. Please go over to republicbroadcasting.org, hit that donate button. We rely on you to stay on the air. We don't get big corporate checks or checks from shadowy non-governmental organizations with hidden agendas. We are a people's network, and we rely on you, the people, to keep us powered up and on the air. Thank you. Talk to you tomorrow. Aloha, America.